A California district attorney whose last stint in the media was getting blasted for deciding not to prosecute a police officer who shot and killed an unarmed boy is back in the news for aggressively prosecuting nonviolent activists. In 2013, Officer Eric Galahous shot and killed Andy Lopez, an unarmed 13-year-old boy. Sonoma County District Attorney Jill Ravitch declined to prosecute. She's now pressing 42 felony charges against 6 animal rights activists. Jill seems unfazed by public pressure, and certainly common decency, evidenced by her flagrant abuse of power. The activists in this case are being charged with 2 counts of conspiracy, 4 counts of burglary, and 1 count of grand theft of fruits and vegetables, because chickens are right there next to olives and avocados and the things that can be stolen and called vegetables. DXC, the group that organized the action, says that among the felony defendants are people who never entered barns, people who never touched an animal, people who had no role in organizing the action. They're calling this misuse of power selective prosecution. They believe that Jill is prosecuting them just for the appearance of leadership and previous attendance at meetings with officials, something that's clearly protected speech.
So basically, to just lay this out really clearly, a prosecutor who did not take any action in a literal murder case, a 13-year-old boy, unarmed child, murdered in the streets with a gun by a police officer, no action from this prosecutor. Now you have a situation where 6, peaceful, nonviolent, unarmed, obviously goes without saying, protesters exercising First Amendment activity, pushing the lines of classic civil disobedience, but felony charges in this case, most members of our society would find that to be pretty strong. And this is the same prosecutor making the same decision. In one case, not to charge in a murder case that was pretty cut and dry. And now we're looking at, again, I think a pretty cut and dry case of peaceful protesters. And she's got, suddenly now, overflowing with felony charges, 42 felony charges.
I know even whether or not the civil disobedience is something that's protected by First Amendment activity, this emphasis on leadership certainly is, because these are people who didn't actually do anything special in the action. There were 58 people arrested that day, and only 6 of them are facing these felony charges, which means that there's this huge emphasis just on people who are perceived to be leaders, people who have, they're shown online a lot, or they showed up to meetings with officials, people who just spoke, really, and had association with people that the DA does not approve of, which is, the freedom of assembly is something that's very directly protected by the First Amendment.
Right, and in our system, prosecutors, I think people are starting to realize that prosecutors are totally unaccountable to any kind of oversight. And one device that gives prosecutors basically carte blanche to do whatever they want in this situation is called prosecutorial discretion, which means that they can freely decline to charge and not charge anyone based on anything. And so in this case, there's actually nothing illegal about choosing to charge people for nonviolent, peaceful, protests. Obviously now electing to bring felony charges is an interesting choice, but there's nothing illegal about her choosing to charge some of these people based on speech activity that they made in an entirely different context. So now is basically clearly documented, and this is documented in the discovery surrounding the case, that basically the case that Jill Ravitch is making, or that her office is making, is that these people are, agitating in a completely different place, talking about completely different activity, and then they should be targeted and kind of have this very severe penalty brought down on them.
Yeah, I don't really know how that works, because prosecutorial discretion is something we know a lot about, but selective prosecution is also something that could totally cause a case to be thrown out. The fact that it hasn't been yet, it seems completely clear that these 6 individuals have nothing special about them from an evidentiary point of view. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Another interesting thing is that at their arraignment, the defendants found out that their Facebook messages had been read by the government without their knowledge at all. So Jill Ravitch got a warrant, has been monitoring these private Facebook messages completely unbeknownst to the defendants.
Right, and so Facebook has been in the news a lot a lot over the last several months about all kinds of concerns with privacy, and one concern that isn't talked about very much is that Facebook, as far as the government is concerned, anything that you might consider private communication on Facebook is an open book. So Facebook, is very willing to respond to requests by the government to disclose, pretty much any activity that happens on their platform with the kind of lowest standard of evidence. So in this case, again, people who are just accused of a peaceful act of civil disobedience at one place and time, and now all of their Facebook communications have been handed over to this prosecutor.
Yeah, that's a year's worth of communication. I mean, we've all been posting lately about 10 years ago what I was posting on Facebook. I mean, this is just a ridiculous amount of information that's just being turned over to the government for just no reason.
Those of us who follow the headlines a little more closely have grown very accustomed to seeing Facebook do these kinds of things, and have started to appreciate that Facebook is really in no way a private, no part of Facebook is a private forum. But I think for most people, for most Americans still, it's kind of a troubling realization to find out how much things that you think are private, things that people agree are as principled stand, exercising First Amendment protected rights, can suddenly open up your entire kind of digital existence on a platform like Facebook